Here is what most people do not know about the Folsom Prison concert. Johnny Cash had been trying to record a live album at a prison for over a decade. Columbia Records had said no every time he asked. The label did not understand why the biggest name in country music wanted to perform for an audience of convicted felons, and the label's uncertainty was the specific uncertainty of an institution whose job is to manage commercial assets and who does not have a framework for understanding why one of their most valuable assets keeps insisting on doing things that the framework cannot accommodate. He asked again in 1967. Columbia said yes, possibly because The Cave and The Withdrawal and The Marriage to June had produced in Johnny Cash a quality of purposefulness that was difficult to refuse, possibly because the label had run out of patience for saying no to the same request, possibly simply because the timing was finally right in the way that things are sometimes finally right after years of being premature. On January 13, 1968, Johnny Cash walked onto the stage of the dining hall of Folsom State Prison in California and performed for 2,000 inmates with the specific quality of presence that a man brings to a room when the room is the place he has been trying to reach his entire career. The album that resulted from that performance is considered one of the greatest live recordings in American music history. It went to #1. It won 2 Grammy Awards. It introduced Johnny Cash to an audience that had not been paying attention and reintroduced him to an audience that had. But what happened on that stage between the man and the prisoners in the specific exchange that the music produced is something that no chart position or Grammy citation can adequately describe. Because the prisoners knew what Johnny Cash knew, and Johnny Cash knew that they knew. And the knowing on both sides is what made the room that day unlike any other room in American music. This is Episode 4. The comeback that changed everything, the love that held, the faith that deepened, and the complexity that never went away. The onstage proposal at Maple Leaf Gardens on February 22, 1968 is one of the most public private moments in country music history. Johnny Cash has asked June Carter to marry him before, multiple times, in private, in the specific direct way of a man who knows what he wants and has learned from The Cave that not asking for what you want is not an option that time permits. June has said no every time. Not because she does not love him. Ring of Fire is the permanent record of exactly how much she loves him, and how long she has loved him, and what the loving has cost her. She says no because she is a practical woman of clear intelligence who understands that marrying Johnny Cash in the years before The Cave would have been marrying the addiction as much as the man, and that what the man needs is not a wife, but a recovery. The recovery has happened. Imperfectly, incompletely, with the fragility of something that has just begun, rather than something that has been fully established, but it has happened. Johnny has come through the withdrawal. He has stayed clean for longer than any previous period of sobriety in the decade behind him. He is thinner and older and carrying everything the pills cost him, but he is present in a way that the amphetamines made impossible. Genuinely, fully present in the room rather than chemically adjacent to it. He stops the show at Maple Leaf Gardens and turns to June and proposes in front of 7,000 people. The calculation is simple and completely characteristic. June Carter can say no to Johnny Cash in private because in private, the refusal costs only the two of them. In front of 7,000 people, saying no costs the audience as well, in the specific social weight of a public moment, the understanding that the refusal will be witnessed and interpreted and become the story rather than the proposal. He is not manipulating her. He is removing the option of the quiet no in favor of the public yes, betting that what she feels is sufficient to produce the answer he needs when the question cannot be avoided. She says yes. They marry on March 1, 1968, in a ceremony that is intimate relative to the public prominence of both parties. Not the spectacle that celebrity culture would have demanded, but the specific private commitment of two people who have been circling each other for a decade and who are now finally in the same place at the same time with the same answer to the same question. June Carter Cash is not simply a wife. She is the specific person whose presence in Johnny Cash's daily life makes the second half of his career possible. She manages his sobriety with the same practical intensity she brought to hiding his pills, not as a guardian or a keeper, but as a partner. whose understanding of him is complete enough that she knows what he needs before he knows it himself. She provides the structure that the chaos of the touring life requires, the specific human anchor that keeps the locomotive on the tracks rather than accelerating off them. The specific nature of what June provides goes beyond the practical management of sobriety. She provides Johnny with the experience of being genuinely known, of having another person hold the complete picture of who he is. The darkness and the faith and the guilt about Jack and the voice and the hunger and the specific way all of these things coexist in the same man and respond to that complete picture with love rather than judgment. The people in his life before June either knew the public version and responded to it with the admiration that public versions attract, or knew the private version and responded to it with the fear or the exhaustion or the anger that the private version of those years warranted. June knows both simultaneously, has always known both, and her love is specifically for the combination rather than for either element in isolation. This is the love that Ring of Fire was written about. Not the romantic fantasy of perfect compatibility, but the specific, costly, clear-eyed love of someone who sees what a person actually is and chooses them anyway. Johnny Cash understands this. He will understand it more completely with each passing year of the marriage, and the understanding will deepen him in ways that the guitar and the voice and the songs alone could never accomplish. She is also, in her own right, one of the most gifted performers in American country music. A comedian, a musician, a storyteller whose onstage presence is the specific counterweight to Johnny's gravity, the warmth that makes the darkness bearable. They perform together with the ease of two people whose professional and personal lives have become so thoroughly intertwined that the distinction between them has lost its usefulness. Audiences who see them together see something they recognize as real. Two people who genuinely like each other, who make each other better, who have survived enough together that the performance of their relationship is simply the public version of the private one. January 13th, 1968, Folsom State Prison, California. The dining hall holds 2,000 inmates. They have been waiting since the previous year, when the scheduled concert was canceled, the specific, accumulated anticipation of a confined population for whom a live performance by a major artist is not entertainment in the casual sense, but an event, a break in the specific monotony of institutional time that accumulates differently than civilian time. Johnny Cash walks onto the stage and opens with Folsom Prison Blues. The roar that greets the opening bars, the boom, chicka-boom starting, the voice entering with the low certainty that has defined it since 706 Union Avenue, is the sound of 2,000 men recognizing something. Not the famous artist, not the cultural phenomenon, not even the music in the abstract sense. The specific quality of being understood. The specific relief of hearing a man sing about the darkness that they live in without sanitizing it, without managing it into something more comfortable for the people on the outside who prefer not to think about it. When he sings, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die," and the crowd erupts, not a polite audience response, but the specific volcanic explosion of people who have been waiting for that line, who have been reciting it to each other in the yard for years, who receive it as the most direct possible confirmation that the man on the stage is not performing their darkness from a safe distance, but inhabiting it with them. Something happens in that room that the recording captures, and that has never been explained by any subsequent analysis. He belongs there, not because he has done what they have done. His crimes are the crimes of addiction, not of violence or predation, but because the specific quality of his relationship to darkness and guilt and the gap between who a person wants to be and who they have been is genuine, biographical, and visible to people who have spent their lives in exactly that gap. He performs for nearly an hour. The concert is recorded by a 2-track machine on which engineer Bill Miller captures the sound in the room, the music, and the crowd, and the specific acoustic of a prison dining hall, the reverb of concrete and steel giving the recording a quality that no studio could manufacture. The crowd is loud. The crowd is present. The crowd is the third instrument in every song. The relationship between Johnny Cash and a prison audience is worth examining in specific terms because it is not what it appears to be on the surface. It is not the liberal celebrity visiting the incarcerated to demonstrate compassion from a safe distance. The specific social transaction in which a famous person's presence communicates to the confined that the outside world has not forgotten them, while simultaneously reinforcing the distance between the two conditions. That dynamic is real and common and produces a specific quality of performance that audiences in institutional settings recognize and resent because the distance is the point and the audience can feel it. What happens at Folsom is different. The distance is not there. Johnny Cash does not perform down to the audience. He performs with them from a position of genuine biographical peer recognition that the prisoners receive in the first 30 seconds of the first song. When he opens with Folsom Prison Blues and the crowd responds not with polite appreciation, but with the volcanic recognition of people hearing something that belongs to them, it is because the something does belong to them. Not because Cash has been incarcerated, he has not, but because the specific quality of his relationship to darkness and transgression and the gap between who a person is supposed to be and who they have been is genuine in a way that they can hear. The voice knows what it is singing about. The knowing is not a performance. Greystone Chapel, written by Folsom inmate Glenn Shirley and performed by Cash for the first time at that concert, the song given to him by a prison chaplain the night before, is the moment that goes beyond entertainment into something else entirely. Shirley is in the audience. He hears his own song performed by the most famous voice in country music to an audience of his fellow prisoners. The specific emotion of that moment, a man confined by his crimes hearing his own creativity acknowledged and amplified by someone with the platform to make it matter, is what the Folsom Prison album is actually about, beyond any commercial calculation or artistic ambition. Columbia releases the album in May 1968. The response exceeds every expectation the label has. It goes to number 1 on the country chart and reaches the top 5 on the pop chart, the crossover that Columbia had never quite managed to engineer deliberately, produced by the specific authenticity of a live performance in a place where authenticity is the only currency. It wins the Grammy for Best Country Album and Best Male Country Vocal Performance. Johnny Cash, who has spent much of the previous decade in an accelerating descent, is at 36 years old the most celebrated figure in American music. The Johnny Cash Show premieres on ABC in June 1969 and is, for the 2 years of its run, the most important platform in American music. The concept is simple and, in the context of American television in 1969, almost radical. A variety show on a major network hosted by a country music artist that does not confine itself to the genre conventions of country music. Johnny Cash uses the show to bring together performers who have never shared a stage in the context of mainstream American television. Bob Dylan, one of the most deliberately obscure and inaccessible of major American artists, appears in the first episode. Louis Armstrong, the founding figure of American jazz, appears. Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Pete Seeger, Ray Charles. The show's guest list is a deliberate argument about what American music is, not a collection of segregated genres, but a unified tradition of voices speaking to the same human conditions from different biographical positions. The show reaches 18 million viewers weekly at its peak. It makes Johnny Cash the most visible musical figure in America, not merely in the country genre, but across the entire landscape of popular music. He is, in the specific cultural context of 1969 and 1970, the point at which American music converges, the man who can stand on the same stage as Dylan and Armstrong and Seeger and connect them all to the same tradition without diminishing any of them. He is also, in his personal life, experiencing a period of genuine stability that the previous decade made impossible. June is managing the household and the career with the practical intelligence that is her specific gift. Son John Carter Cash is born in March 1970, the child that Johnny and June have been building toward, the arrival of a new generation into a family that has been reconstructed from the ruins of the previous one. Johnny holds his son with the specific emotion of a man who understands what the holding represents, the evidence that the cave was not the ending, that the life after Nickajack is real and contains things worth living for. The faith deepens in these years in ways that the public visibility of the period simultaneously expresses and constrains. Johnny is genuinely, privately, daily practicing a Christianity that is not the performance of religious identity for a country music audience, but the actual organizing principle of his interior life. He reads scripture. He prays. He makes the Gospel Road film in 1973, a personal project, funded largely with his own money, telling the story of Jesus through the landscape of the Holy Land. That is neither commercially successful nor critically celebrated, but that is the most direct expression of what the faith actually means to him outside the mediated context of concert performance. The Billy Graham friendship develops during these years into a genuine personal connection between two men who share the specific quality of public faith, both of them living their Christianity in front of audiences whose attention makes the private practice of belief simultaneously supported and complicated. Graham sees in Cash the specific combination of genuine faith and genuine human failure that makes the faith meaningful rather than merely decorative, a man whose darkness is documented and whose belief is not diminished by the documentation, but deepened by it. Graham tells Cash something that lodges in him permanently, that his combination of documented sin and genuine redemption makes him more useful to the gospel than a man whose record is clean, because the people who need to hear about grace are not the people who have never needed it. The people who need to hear about grace are the people in the Folsom Prison dining hall, the people whose lives contain the same specific combination of wanting to be good and repeatedly failing to be it that Johnny Cash's life has always contained. A man with a clean record cannot speak to them with authority. A man who crawled out of a cave in Tennessee can. Cash absorbs this, and it becomes part of the theological framework through which he understands his own history. Not just the cave and the recovery, but the entire preceding decade of destruction. The arrests, the pills, the fires, the marriages ended, the 40 pounds of weight lost to chemistry rather than intention. None of it was the point, but all of it was the preparation. The darkness was the education. The education produced the authority. The authority produced the connection. The connection produced Folsom Prison, and Folsom Prison produced everything that followed. The addiction, however, does not disappear. It retreats, managed by June's vigilance and the structure that the marriage provides and the genuine transformation that the cave produced. But it does not disappear. The San Quentin album follows Folsom Prison in 1969 and in some ways exceeds it, not in the specific emotional urgency of the Folsom recording, which has the unrepeatable quality of a first encounter, but in the commercial and cultural impact that the second album consolidates. A Boy Named Sue is recorded live at San Quentin and becomes the most unlikely hit of Johnny Cash's career. A spoken-word comic narrative written by Shel Silverstein about a boy who grows up hating the father who named him Sue, finds him in a bar, fights him violently, and comes to understand in the aftermath of the fight why the name was a gift. It reaches #1 on the country chart and #2 on the pop chart. It earns Johnny Cash his first Grammy nomination for Best Male Country Vocal in the pop chart era. It introduces him to an audience that had not previously associated him with humor, and the introduction is revelatory. The man in black, it turns out, is funny, and the humor is as honest as the darkness. The contrast between A Boy Named Sue and Folsom Prison Blues as consecutive entries in the same artist's discography is the most complete possible demonstration of what Johnny Cash is. Not the outlaw, not the Christian, not the humorist, not the folk singer. All of them simultaneously. The coexistence that the songs express is the same coexistence that the life contains, and the audience that loves him because they recognize in the range of what he is willing to be on a recording, a version of the range that most human lives contain. The relationship with Bob Dylan, which begins with the television show, develops into a genuine friendship and musical connection that produces the 1969 Nashville Skyline album, on which Cash writes the liner notes, the most direct possible endorsement of a figure who, at that cultural moment, represents everything that the country music establishment finds threatening. Cash's willingness to align himself publicly with Dylan is not a calculated crossover strategy. It is the specific expression of a man whose own artistic identity was always too large for any single genre's container, extending that recognition to another artist whose similar quality he identifies and respects. The family life in Hendersonville, Tennessee, where Johnny and June have established their home, the House of Cash becoming a compound of professional and domestic spaces organized around the specific needs of a career that never stops, has the quality of something genuinely built rather than simply acquired. June tends the house with the same total attention she brings to everything. The children are present. The faith is practiced. The sobriety holds imperfectly but persistently through the early years of the decade. Johnny Cash at the end of the 1960s is what The Cave produced. Not a reformed version of the destructive man, not the saint that the public rehabilitation narrative would prefer, but something more honest and more complete. A man who knows what the darkness is because he lived there, who has come back from it carrying the knowledge as a gift rather than a shame, who sings about the prisoners and the outcasts and the condemned with the authority of someone who looked at himself clearly enough in the Nickajack cave to understand that the difference between him and the people in those cells was thinner than anyone on the outside prefers to believe. That authority, not performed, not assumed, but earned in the specific biographical way that genuine authority is always earned, is what the Folsom Prison audience heard. It is what the 18 million weekly viewers of the Johnny Cash Show received. It is what June Carter understood when she wrote Ring of Fire, and what she confirmed when she said yes at Maple Leaf Gardens. It is what endures. Episode 5, The Wilderness Years, the 1970s, the decline, the addiction returning, and the long, difficult decade before Rick Rubin made a phone call that nobody expected. This is Legends of America.